The Amped EV podcast is sponsored by Autel Energy. Visit autelenergy.com for more information.
Hi, and welcome back to the Amped EV podcast. My name is David Sickles. I am the editor for The Buzz.
And I am Jason Morgan, content director for Fleet Equipment.
Jason, this is an interesting interview we've got here today.
Okay, tell me more.
I shall. So we talk about infrastructure all the time.
All the time.
It's always about infrastructure.
Always.
And about how we need more of it. And how EV chargers equals infrastructure, essentially. I mean, that's what I think in my head.
That sounds like an apt equation for two editors to put together.
Right, exactly. However, I think we're about to learn a lot because apparently that's not it. I mean, that's part of the equation.
Okay,
but
we're missing a variable.
Yes, there are several variables actually.
Oh, there's a Y and a Z. Okay.
A to Z,
Oh,
honestly.
gosh, okay.
We put together like A and B, C through Z we're missing.
Okay.
So, in order to explain a few things to us,
Yep.
I invited Lou Cox. He is the Director of Business Development at MD7, which is a telecoms tower and data center consultancy company, onto the show to explain kind of what goes into the infrastructure before you can put in the EV charging infrastructure.
Okay.
They help people with their installation needs.
Yeah.
So let's go to the interview.
Well, I'm amped to learn more.
So am I.
Got it.
Lou, thank you very much for joining us. I'm really excited for this. So can you give us a little bit of background into MD7 and also your background into, how you're helping people install charging infrastructure?
Absolutely, David. I very much appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to me today. My name, as I mentioned, is Lou Cox. I am the Director of Business Development for MD7. MD7 is a digital infrastructure consultancy, and we specialize in the deployment of really any infrastructure that helps keep people connected. Our specialty over the last couple of decades has been telecom, and more recently we've transitioned into electric vehicle infrastructure and electric vehicle supply equipment. There's some really nice partnerships we've got with lots of companies as well as the network operators. We've been able to apply the terminologies and the strategies that we've used from telecom into EV charging infrastructure, because we feel that if you're going to go ahead and roll out something as massive as this, right, 500,000 charging stations publicly, you have to do that methodically and intelligently and make sure that you've got the fail safes in place to prevent some of the headaches that we discovered in telecom, decades ago during a very similar land grab or build out, if you will. I've been working for MD7 for the better part of 8 or 9 years now. I think I started in 2014, so it'll be about 8 years. And I've done just about everything at this company, from initial real estate negotiation to project management to, small cell and telecom discussions with property owners. So it was only natural for me to transition into EV infrastructure and talk to a lot of those very same commercial and retail landlords about how to electrify their parking lot in a meaningful and thoughtful way.
So can you tell us a little bit about, marrying that telecom and that EV infrastructure worlds, especially in terms of, fiber? Specifically, what advantages does the fiber installation offer to EV charging?
Sure. So when you talk about why you would look at fiber and EV charging infrastructure in the same kind of vein, it's because both are going to require a significant amount of either trenching or boring or some sort of construction that would tear up the ground to lay this underlying infrastructure and conduit for the electric vehicle charging stations, you need to do the exact same thing for fiber. And it doesn't make a ton of sense to tear up the ground twice if you know that you're going to, put fiber to these stations or put it to the actual building where the parking lot sits. If you're going to go through the effort of tearing up the concrete, you might as well future-proof, if you will, that infrastructure, because there will be a need for it in the nearby future. I think that a lot of the advantages that come with putting fiber in at charging stations include connectivity for the people that are actually charging, vehicle-to-grid technology to be able to talk to the various utility companies and find out where there might be a peak load event, as well as charger status. As you're navigating somewhere, if you're on a road trip, you would like to know how many of these things are occupied or not. Connectivity is really the crux of all of that kind of problem, and making sure that these chargers are developed in a way that allows for future uses of those kinds of cases is, in my opinion, the most effective way to build out this network.
Very cool. Lou, we've been talking to a lot of commercial fleets that are installing infrastructure. This is the first time I'm hearing about really a need for the fiber upgrade too, or at least to your point, while you're digging up the ground, you might as well put the lines in. What is the ROI on this kind of thing, either for maybe a commercial fleet, municipality, even a consumer, right? If I'm putting in infrastructure at my house, I want to be able to reap the benefits too. Can you go a little deeper into some of the connectivity or availability of charging benefits and why is it worth the squeeze here?
Absolutely. I can use a use case specifically for a commercial property owner. If you have a retail center and lots of shopping centers inside your property lines, if you're going to go ahead and go through the effort of try and put chargers in place for your customers or for the customers of the people who are your clients, you want to make sure that these are things they're actually going to use. So that doesn't mean putting chargers in the back of a parking lot or inside of a garage where they don't even get any cell signal, especially if they're going to be DC fast chargers. And historically, people hang out with their cars during a fast charging session. You don't want them to sit there and be disconnected from the world or be forced to step out of their car into the weather. Maybe it's really hot, maybe it's raining. And most people, when charging at a DC fast charger, want to be able to browse the internet, watch a YouTube video, listen to this podcast perhaps, and giving them the network connectivity to be able to do that, I feel is an added value, on that ROI we talked about a little earlier, not only for the property owner, but for the end consumer. And that makes it more likely for them to use the infrastructure. And people who will use the infrastructure will think more highly of the restaurants and the retail centers that provide it to them. And they're more likely to come inside or spend more time on the property, usually spending their dollars.
So do you think that now is probably the best time to be doing that if you are going down that road of installing these EV chargers, or do you think there's any merit in, waiting a few years, seeing where the technology goes?
I think that you definitely have the option of waiting because EV adoption isn't quite at the point where it's, 1 in 3 consumers owns an EV and needs charging, destination charging as we call it, at your retail center. But I think that if you are one of the properties that is thinking ahead and wants to really usher in this new area of EV adoption and make sure that those customers feel comfortable on your properties, this is one very easy solution to make sure that your chargers get use, which drives revenue for you, the property owner. It drives revenue for the network operators that helped partner with you to put these chargers in, and it drives additional revenue to the people in the retail centers who are trying to serve these customers while they come to your facilities to use it for whatever reasons, movie theaters, restaurants, shopping. All of these things are benefited by ensuring that the people that come to your property stay there because the chargers not only work, but they're available and they have connectivity in the process, and it gives them more information to be an informed consumer as they go about their day-to-day and where they choose to do business.
Right, for sure. I mean, in our world, we deal with a lot of automotive repair too, and as automotive repair gets into it, and more electric vehicles start showing up, the question of, okay, if I'm a repair shop owner, how do I invest in infrastructure? How do I do I make it publicly available? Do I not? And all those kind of questions. So I want to go back to something you said earlier that caught my interest. You mentioned fail-safes and telecom headaches that you learned back in those days and bringing that into the EV infrastructure space and the fiber space. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of those challenges are, and maybe give us a little insight into what are some of the stumbling blocks in that EV and fiber infrastructure process, and how do you help people avoid this?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that the wireless industry was affected by back in the 90s or late 80s, early 90s was this land grab that we're seeing almost play out play by play in EV right now, where everybody realized that cellular phones were the future, and it was a matter of putting as many sites as humanly possible in as many places, and not so much thoughtful design went into what that looks like or how you maintain those assets in the future. So when you're putting them on top of a mountain or on, the 57th floor of a building, and you're thinking, oh, this is great, it will reach just about everybody, that ended up biting them in the rear a little bit later on, because too much connectivity was the issue, and there wasn't enough bandwidth to get all of the people that were under that, umbrella, if you will, of a cell site to push their data through the pipeline. So when you have sites that are maybe not as viable, is a term we use in the industry, because they don't have the right level of fiber connectivity, nobody thought into the future about how much they would really need to put through this. So when you're in the middle of nowhere and you've got an 80-foot tower, that tower is not as effective as maybe a 240-foot guide tower might be connected to a fiber network that provides more coverage on a single tower. And now you'd have to put, 2 or 3 more 80-foot towers to try and get the similar level of coverage, and you've spent 2 or 3 times the money to do that. What we're proposing at MD7 and what is the core of our services is to think ahead, right? And think about how do we keep people connected in these parking spaces? How do we turn a non-revenue generating asset like a parking space into something that not only generates revenue, but is future-proofed, if you will, and set up for the future to be successful for the partner that we have installed this for, or the network operator that is building out their deployment as it is.
That's very, very interesting. Can you give us some insight as far as kind of what the approval process is for, trying to install some of these EV chargers on site?
Absolutely. It does vary based on who you are as an entity, right? But I would say the typical strategy is first, if we're operating for a network operator, say, a Volta or a Tesla or EVgo or whoever, they first need site partner approval, which starts with an initial site walk. We would determine whether or not it's viable to put a charging station here, how many stalls, where's power coming from, etc. Then we have to turn that design into the site partner. The site partner, who is the property owner, who probably isn't an EV expert, is going to decide whether or not they like the aesthetics or whether or not it has a large impact on their day-to-day business, or it reaches a blackout period if you're a retail center or something like that during construction. Those approvals are the first step before you can really get into some of the jurisdictional and funding and utility approvals. Immediately after that, you've got to go for permits. In some cases, you need zoning if you've got advertisements or something on your charger. Then you need to go and find funding to get this project actually built if it's not being provided by the site partner themselves, which in most cases for a network operator it usually isn't. And then you've got to coordinate with the various utility companies, which have outrageous lead times on transformers these days. For a DCFC station, most of the time the property you're deploying at won't have the proper amperage or power to provide that charging station with the full capacity that it would need. So you would need to do what's called a utility application and ask for a new transformer from, say, SDG&E here in San Diego. And the process of that usually can take anywhere from 9 to 18 months just to get a new transformer out there from the utility. And it's a very expensive process. It's a $50,000 transformer. So it's possible you go through all of the approvals, you get to the end, and then you go to apply for a new transformer and you're waiting almost 2 years to get your site turned on that you built a year ago.
Yeah, that's incredible. I know from the fleet perspective, we're always hearing that you need to be starting this process, a year and a half, 2 years ahead at the minimum, just to be sure that you're going to be where you need to be and have everything kind of in tune there. So you've said that although the federal government is giving out a lot of money for all these this nationwide rollout of EV chargers, that federal funding might not be enough. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Sure. So in my opinion, I think that we have a great goal as a country to put 500,000 public chargers in the U.S., and they provided what is no, small amount of money. It's $7.5 billion when you include the funding for disadvantaged communities into the total number. With the rising costs of transformers, with labor, with general electrical expertise, which is at a shortage right now for really any company in this space, it's very difficult to make that 7.5 billion add up to 500,000 public charging stations, right? And when you talk about a typical build for a DCFC station, it is not uncommon for it to get above $150,000, $200,000, $250,000 for an installation of half a dozen chargers. So if we're spending $250,000 on one site, we're going to run out of money before we get to 7.5 billion to put 499,000 more in the ground. So I think the solution to that, right, that gap has got to be bridged by private companies, right? It's got to be bridged by the private sector who are going to shoulder the load and make it their mission to deploy this infrastructure more effectively, more efficiently, and use that money wisely, in addition to, finding a way to monetize the model to make it make sense financially to provide charging to people publicly.
Excellent. Well, Lou, I really appreciate you, helping us understand what it actually takes here to get these EV chargers installed and what infrastructure you need before you can begin installing the infrastructure. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Take care.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Excellent.
I learned a few things.
So
How
my
about you?
my biggest, at least just coming fresh off it, one of the things he said that stuck with me that I think is interesting for fleets is turning a parking space into a revenue generating That
I
was
underlined that.
Yeah.
I underlined it.
I love
yes.
it. You know what? And that's interesting. So, you think about it in fleet applications, we're running a lot of regional, maybe a lot of hubs. And I'm going to put infrastructure in my place. Maybe my competitor will also need infrastructure. Do I open up any chargers for public use that maybe my competitor rolls in and then pays me to charge their truck to make their I don't know. Maybe there's something there.
I'm sure you're not the first one to have thought of that.
Well, that disappoints me, but I understand.
I don't mean it in that way, but I do mean that it's a really good idea.
Yeah, pop my balloon right there. But no, yeah, I mean, it's something to think about.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, him talking about the land grab kind of
land
idea.
grab. That was cool.
That says a lot to me about him saying that tells me that this EV thing that's happening is probably not just a passing fad.
Right.
I mean, not that I really thought that to begin with, but
That's right. Host of an EV dedicated podcast.
Let me make that clear here. But really, what I'm trying to say is that this kind of land grab mentality is obviously happening right now.
Right.
And having somebody on the other end who can help you thoughtfully do this and not have it be in the way when cell phones started to really start popping up with everybody. That is going to be needed, or this whole EV charging rollout is going to take a lot longer. We're going to have a lot more headaches.
Well, and maybe and this is just me spitballing, maybe it also continues, right? I mean, sure, I loved his analogy to the wireless cell tower explosion.
Yes.
But then we saw 4G roll out, and we saw 5G roll out. Hey, how many commercials did you see about they're rolling out stuff?
Right.
Or like
Right.
wireless takes a lot of cable. Wireless isn't wireless. Are we in for something in the same thing with EV charger? It's not, we've talked about expandability. We've talked about increasing the footprint there, availability. So, I mean, this is probably not a set it and forget it kind of thing, right? It's going to be an evolving situation as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about these consumer chargers where, consumers are going to want to be surfing the web or watching Netflix while they're charging up. Or maybe that charger has a big old screen on it that's serving you advertisements. I mean, these things are going to need this new style of infrastructure to be able to handle all of that, plus the charging needs of your vehicle.
For sure. Man, you get a sponsor and already you're serving ads here. I see how your mind works. You're spending a lot of time with those salespeople. But I mean, it happens at the gas pump right now too, right? You put it in the tank, it starts playing ads.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Generate that revenue.
Of course.
All right. Very good.
Well, thanks, Jason.
Thanks for setting it up.
And thank you. We'll see you next time.